Imagine being lost in the woods, surrounded by shadows that move when you're not looking. The air is thick, suffocating, filled with whispers you can't quite understand. You turn, but the path behind you is gone. And then you see it, a house standing tall against the blood-red sky, a house that was never supposed to be there, Blackwood Manor. For over a century, Blackwood Manor has been abandoned, or so they say. The locals refuse to go near it, speaking in hushed tones about the ones who never came back. The children who went missing, the people who tried to leave, but never made it out. This is the story of what really happened inside Blackwood Manor. And by the end of this video, you will be left thinking about the terrifying things happening in our world. There's a place deep in Blackwood Forest where the trees grow too close together, where the air is always cold even in the middle of summer. The kind of place where the wind carries whispers and shadows stretch longer than they should. Hidden within this darkness stands a house that no one built, yet it has always been there. Blackwood Manor. For generations, the townspeople have avoided it. They don't look at it. They don't talk about it unless forced. And if you ask too many questions, they'll simply shake their heads and tell you the same thing: don't go there. But warnings don't stop everyone. Over the years, those who were foolish enough to step inside its walls never came back. The stories tell of families who moved in and were never seen again. Of travelers who took shelter there for a single night, only to leave their belongings behind untouched, as if they simply vanished. Locals speak of strange lights flickering in the windows, even though no one has lived there for over 100 years. And if you stand at the edge of the forest at night, some claim you can hear a child's laughter coming from inside. But legends are just stories, right? That's what a group of researchers thought. They wanted to uncover the truth, prove that Blackwood Manor was nothing more than an abandoned house with an exaggerated history. So, ignoring every warning, they packed their bags and headed deep into Blackwood Forest. The road leading to the manor was long and narrow, winding through miles of lifeless trees. There were no signs, no markings, nothing to guide them forward. It felt like the kind of place that didn't want to be found. But eventually, the trees thinned, and there it was. Blackwood Manor stood tall and untouched, as if waiting for them. The house was massive, 3 stories high, its windows like hollow eyes staring into the woods. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving the walls a sickly shade of gray. Ivy had wrapped itself around the porch, creeping through the cracks of broken glass. The air was heavy, thick with something they couldn't name. And yet, the front door stood open, as if inviting them in. For a moment, no one spoke. No one moved, because standing before the house, they felt something. Not excitement, not curiosity, something else. Like the house was watching them. But they shook it off, told themselves it was just the setting, the eerie feel of the place messing with their heads. After all, they were here for a reason, to prove the legends were just stories, to show that ghosts weren't real. They stepped inside, and the door, slowly, swung shut behind them. The air inside Blackwood Manor was stale, untouched for too long. Dust clung to every surface. The walls, once covered in deep red wallpaper, were now cracked and peeling like something had been clawing its way out from underneath. Faded portraits lined the hallway, their painted eyes following every movement. And then there was the silence, thick and unnatural, as if the house itself was holding its breath. But silence never lasts in a place like this. As the group settled in for the night, they tried to ignore the way the air felt heavier inside, how the chandeliers still held candles that hadn't melted, as if they had never been lit. They laughed about the ghost stories, brushed off the feeling of being watched, but no one could shake the sensation that something about this place was wrong. Then the first sound, a soft creak from above a single step, then another, footsteps, slow, heavy, moving across the floor right above them. They froze, counted the people in the room. Everyone was there. No one was upstairs. One of them called out, but no one answered. The house fell silent again, as if nothing had happened. But now the feeling had changed. The walls seemed to press inward, the air thick enough to taste. Then another sound, a soft thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of a door handle rattling. Down the hall, past the broken chandelier, there was a door they hadn't touched. A nursery. The kind of room no one wanted to open in a place like this. And yet someone was trying to get out. The handle twisted violently now, shaking so hard the entire door trembled in its frame. And then it stopped. Silence. No one dared to move. The door stood there, closed, still. But the moment they turned away, the sound came again. Only this time, it was laughter. Soft, childlike, coming from somewhere deep within the house. The group told themselves it was nothing. The wind, the old house settling, excuses were easier than the truth. So they did what they came here to do. They took notes, took pictures. But no one explored. No one dared to open that door. And when night fell, they each found a place to sleep. Some on the floor, others on dust-covered mattresses. No one spoke about what they heard. No one admitted they were afraid. But the house wasn't done with them. That night, one of them dreamed. In the dream, they were back in bed. But something was different. The room was darker, too dark, the kind of blackness that swallowed everything. And then they felt it. Breath against their skin. A presence at the foot of the bed. They tried to move, but their body wouldn't listen. And then a voice. A whisper, low, cold. "You shouldn't have come." They woke up gasping. The room was empty. The air was still, but the feeling, the weight of something pressing down on their chest, it didn't go away. And as they looked toward the doorway, they swore they saw something just outside the room, standing in the hall, watching. The first night in Blackwood Manor had ended, but the nightmare was only beginning. Morning never really arrived at Blackwood Manor. The sun should have broken through the trees, should have sent light spilling into the windows, but the house remained dim, as if the outside world no longer existed. The group moved through the halls, trying to shake off the unease from the night before, but the feeling followed them, clung to the walls, hung in the air. It started small, a flicker of movement at the edge of their vision, quick, gone before they could turn their heads. First, they thought it was their eyes playing tricks. Then it happened again. And again. Shadows that should have been still were shifting, stretching, curling along the walls like they were alive. At first, it was only in the dark corners of the house. Then the shapes began to move closer, following them down the halls. No one spoke about it. No one wanted to be the first to admit what they were seeing. And then the nursery door. The same door that had rattled the night before, the same door they swore had been locked. Now it was open. Not just slightly, wide, inviting. Inside, the air was thick with dust. The curtains were drawn, yet the rocking horse in the center of the room moved gently, back and forth, as if something had just climbed off of it. They stepped inside, careful not to disturb anything. Broken toys lay scattered across the floor, wooden blocks spelling out nothing but nonsense. A small dollhouse sat in the corner, its tiny windows dark, watching. One of them reached for a music box on a shelf, brushed away the dust, and lifted the lid. Nothing. No sound, no melody. Then a voice, a child's voice, soft, behind them. "Play with me." They spun around. No one was there. Then a mirror across the room, a reflection. Someone standing behind them. A woman dressed in black, hollow eyes, a mouth stretched too wide, as if she had been screaming for too long. They turned. The room was empty. But in the mirror, she was still there. Something was in this house with them, and it was no longer hiding. Blackwood Manor was awake, and it wanted to play. The house had been quiet for too long, the kind of silence that wasn't really empty, more like something was listening. They gathered in the study, flipping through old books and papers, searching for something, anything that explained what was happening inside Blackwood Manor. That's when they found them. Stacked in the corner, yellowed with age, were newspapers from a time long gone, and right there, printed in bold ink, was a name they recognized. The Blackwood family. The article was dated over 100 years ago. It told a story the town had long tried to forget. A wealthy family, a father, a mother, and their 3 children. A house filled with life until one night, everything changed. No struggle, no sign of forced entry, no bodies. The Blackwood family was gone. Their belongings remained untouched. The food still sat on the dining table. A single candle burned till it melted into the wood. But the strangest part, the nursery was locked from the inside, and the children were never found. The papers offered no answers, just speculation, whispers of something unnatural. Some said the mother lost her mind. Some said she took the children into the woods. But others believed the house took them. And if that was true, then maybe they never left. That night, the whispers began. At first, they thought it was the wind, but the sound was too clear, too close. Voices, soft and pleading, drifting through the halls, calling names that no one had spoken aloud. The names of the Blackwood children. They tried to ignore it, told themselves it was just the house, just their own minds playing tricks. But then something else changed. The nursery. The air had shifted, heavy with the scent of flowers, but not the fresh kind. This smell was thick, rotten, the way funeral wreaths smell after they've been sitting too long. And on the walls, scratches. Small, desperate scratches, carved into the wood by tiny hands. They stepped closer, their breath caught in their throats. The scratches weren't random. They formed letters, words. Help us. They weren't alone in this house. And the children were still here. But if the children were trapped, what was keeping them there? They couldn't stay here. Not after what they had seen. Not after the whispers. Not after the words carved into the walls by hands too small to fight back. It was time to leave. They grabbed what they could, packed their things, and stepped outside. The air was colder now, thick with something heavy. The kind of cold that sat deep in the bones, the kind that made breathing feel wrong. The forest was waiting. The path they had taken before was still there, or at least it should have been. But as they walked, something was different. The trees seemed taller, the branches twisting, curling toward them like reaching fingers. The dirt beneath their feet was soft, almost sinking, as if the earth itself wanted to swallow them whole. They walked faster, then ran. But the path didn't lead them out. No matter which way they turned, no matter how far they ran, the forest stretched endlessly ahead. And when they finally stopped, gasping, shaking, their bodies aching from the cold, they looked up. Blackwood Manor stood right in front of them. They hadn't left at all. The sky above them had changed. It was wrong. Not night, not morning, just red. The kind of red that bled through the clouds, staining the world below. No birds, no wind, just stillness. Panic started to creep in, the kind that makes your hands shake, makes your breath come too fast, too sharp. They shouted, screamed for help, but their voices fell flat, swallowed by the trees. Then the rustling, soft at first, just the sound of something moving through the underbrush, then closer, faster. They turned, looked down, and a pale hand shot out from the ground, fingers thin, nails broken, grabbing onto an ankle with a strength that didn't make sense. The scream ripped through the air as they stumbled back, kicking, clawing at the dirt. But the hand was already gone, as if it had never been there at all. The earth was still again, but now they knew they were not alone out here, and no matter how hard they tried to run, the house would always bring them back. They were trapped, and the night was far from over. The house was never going to let them go. They knew that now. No matter how far they ran, the path always led them back. The sky never changed. Time had no meaning here, and the whispers They were getting louder. They needed answers, something to explain why the Blackwood children never left, why their names still echoed through the halls, why someone was keeping them here. They searched the house, room by room, but it wasn't until they stepped into the nursery that they found it. The air was colder here. The scent of rot still clung to the walls. The rocking horse sat still now, but the feeling was the same, like something had just moved, like something was still watching. One of them felt it first, a loose floorboard beneath their foot. When they knelt down, they saw the gap just wide enough to slip their fingers through, and beneath the wood, wrapped in cloth so old it crumbled at the touch, was a book, a diary. The name on the first page sent a chill down their spine. Margaret Blackwood, the governess. They turned the pages carefully. The ink faded, the words shaking as if written by an unsteady hand. And as they read, the story unfolded before them. The truth that the town had buried. The truth the house had never forgotten. Margaret had been hired to care for the Blackwood children. A woman with no family of her own, no children of her own, but something inside her broke. She began to believe they belonged to her, that they were hers, and hers alone. She writes about the mother, how she was unfit, how she didn't deserve them, how she would take them away. Then the entries change. They become frantic. Her words scratch deep into the paper, as if she pressed too hard, as if she was desperate to make them permanent. She writes about locking the nursery door. She writes about the children crying. She writes about the silence after the crying stopped. And on the final page, the ink is darker, as if she had dipped the pen over and over again, making sure these last words could never fade. They are mine forever. The room felt different now, as if the walls had drawn closer, as if the house had been waiting for them to find this. A single sound broke the silence, a creak from above, the attic, where Margaret Blackwood took her last breath, and where she still waited. They didn't want to go up there, but now they had no choice. There was only one way out now. The house wasn't going to let them leave. The forest would always bring them back. The doors would never stay open. The whispers would never stop. The house was alive, and it wanted them to stay. So they did the only thing left to do. They tried to destroy it. They gathered whatever they could find, old furniture, broken chairs, ripped curtains, and piled it in the center of the room. The walls were dry, the wood rotted. The house should have gone up in seconds. The match struck. The flame caught, the fire spread, and then it didn't. The flames flickered, swayed, and just like that, gone. As if the air had been pulled from the room, as if something had stolen the fire before it could do its job. That was when they heard it. The laughter, soft, light, like a game was about to begin. They turned, and there they were. The children, pale, hollow-eyed, smiling. "Stay with us." The door slammed, hard, violent, the kind of force that rattled the walls, sent dust raining from the ceiling, and just like that, one of them was gone. They shouted their name, pounded against the wood, tried to break it down. But the door wouldn't budge, wouldn't even shake. It was as if the house had swallowed them whole. The others searched, sprinting through the halls, checking every room, calling their name over and over again. And then they saw it. In the farthest corner of the hall, where the light barely reached, a set of eyes stared back at them. Wide, unblinking, familiar, but there was no body, only eyes, watching. The whisper came again, closer this time, not from the walls, not from the shadows, from right beside them. "Stay." The candles blew out, and the darkness took them. There was only one place left to go, the attic. The house had taken one of them. The whispers were no longer just whispers. The children were no longer just shadows. The doors would not open. The windows would not break. There was no way out unless they ended it, so they climbed. The steps groaned beneath their weight, each one louder than the last. The air grew colder, thick with something foul, the scent of decay, the kind of smell that stuck to your skin, clung to your clothes, the kind that made you feel like something was rotting nearby. The attic door was open. Inside there was no furniture, no boxes, no dust-covered memories of a life left behind, just empty space and her, Margaret Blackwood. She stood in the center of the room, her body draped in black. Her face, what was left of it, was hollow, stretched into something that barely looked human. No eyes, no mouth, just a shape where a person should have been. She didn't move. She didn't breathe, but they felt her. And then she spoke. A whisper so soft it barely reached their ears. "You can never leave." The door behind them slammed shut, and the children stepped forward. One by one, pale faces emerging from the darkness. Their smiles were too wide, their heads tilting in perfect sync. They moved without sound, without effort. Closer, closer. The group backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The walls stretched, the shadows thickened, the attic itself seemed to be swallowing the light. Then the children's hands reached out. Cold fingers wrapped around their wrists, their ankles, tugging, pulling. The darkness rose like water, climbing their legs, slipping under their skin, pulling them down, down, down. The last thing they saw was Margaret Blackwood, standing still, watching, smiling. The house had taken them, and Blackwood Manor was hungry again. Silence. No screaming, no footsteps, no whispers. Just the deep, endless silence of a house that had taken what it wanted. The darkness lingers, then fades. Time moves forward, and then a car pulls up the long, winding road. A family steps out, fresh faces, new voices. They stand in front of Blackwood Manor, staring up at its towering frame. The mother hesitates, glancing back at the driver. He forces a smile. "It just needs a little work," he says. The father pushes open the front door, the old hinges groaning in protest. Dust swirls in the air, dancing in the light that filters through the cracked windows. The children rush inside, their laughter filling the empty space. A new beginning. But the house is never empty. Not really. The family steps into the grand hallway, eyes sweeping over the space. Then one of them notices the portraits on the wall, large, framed, elegant, faces of strangers staring back. The mother tilts her head, studying them. The details feel too sharp, too lifelike. The paint fresh, the colors deep. But it's the eyes that catch her attention. The eyes are watching her. She blinks. The moment passes. A trick of the light, she tells herself. And then the mirror. It stands at the end of the hall, its surface fogged with age. The father brushes his hand across it, clearing the glass, revealing their reflections. But there is someone else standing behind them. A figure, familiar, unmoving. One of the portraits. No, not a portrait. One of the lost. Their face is pale, hollow. Their lips curl into a slow, creeping smile. And then they whisper, "Welcome home."